Good afternoon. My name is Andy Rappaport. I'd like to welcome you to the Minnesota Street Project and the program Women Who Transformed Art in the West. I am standing in today for my wife Deborah, who sends her regrets. She is home with the flu. She was really hoping that she would rally to be able to be here, and she did rally several times, but unfortunately the flu rallied as well, and it won. So I'd like to welcome you. Deborah and I are the co-founders and co-managers of the Minnesota Street Project, the project that encompasses, among other things, the building here where you're sitting today. And we are absolutely thrilled to be able to host this program today. We've all really been looking forward to it. This is our second collaboration with the Bill Lane Center for the American West at Stanford. We are hoping this is the second in what will become a long, long line of programs like this one. I'd like to thank not only all of you for being here today and encourage you to take advantage of the other things that happen in this building when the program is over. But I'd also like to thank Mark Levin and his team at Stanford for putting this program together. And I'd like to thank on our team, Julie Casemore, Aaron Dunnigan, Francesca Sonara, Ariel Reback, and Michael Rubel, who really keep this program running and are responsible for the building being able to accommodate all of you today. I'd like to ask you all to turn off your cell phones, please. Very important step. And then I'd like to introduce Bruce Kane. Bruce is the Eccles Family Director of the Bill Lane Center for the American West and the Ducommun Professor in the Humanities and Sciences at Stanford. Bruce, to say the least, is an expert in U.S. politics. That's how Deborah and I first met Bruce quite some time ago, and particularly expert in the politics of California and the American West. He's a pioneer in computer-assisted redistricting, and he is a prominent scholar of elections, political regulations, and the relationships between lobbyists, special interests, and elected officials. So without further ado, let me turn this over to Bruce, who will guide you through the rest of the program.
Thank you very much, Andy, and yes, indeed, I hope it will be a collaboration that will extend into the future. As many of you know, the Bill Lane Center for the American West was founded a little over a decade ago with the idea that the West, in terms of its culture, its history, and its involvement in contemporary problem solving, is a unique region and ought to be studied and given more consideration than it typically gets, particularly on the East Coast. So today we're really happy to do this, and let me, before I introduce our keynote speaker, let me just say a word of thanks to some people that have worked very hard to put this together from our staff. In particular, I want to single out Mark Levin, who is an affiliated scholar at the Stanford Bill Lane Center, and prior to that was my colleague at Berkeley. And also, I want to thank Surabhi from my staff and Mac Taylor and the Minnesota Street Project staff that assisted us with this. So one thing to bear in mind is that the event, as you can see, is being video recorded for later webcasting on the Bill Lane Center. So if there's something you missed or you want to see it again, we'll give you a chance to do that. And our site is west@stanford.edu. So our speaker today is, our keynote speaker is Arnold Kemp. Arnold is an artist and a writer who has been critically and professionally engaged with making, exhibiting, publishing, and teaching in cities such as San Francisco, New York, Portland, and Chicago since 1991. He's worked internationally in Stockholm, Paris, Vienna, Berlin, and Nassau, Bahamas. His works are in the collections of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Berkeley Art Museum, and the Pacific Film Archive, the Tacoma Art Museum, the Schneider Museum of Art, and the Fine Arts Collection of UC Davis. He was a 2012 Guggenheim Fellow and also received awards and fellowships from the Joan Mitchell Mitchell Foundation, the Pollock-Krasner Foundation, Art Matters, Inc., Printed Matter, Inc., and the Portland Institute for Contemporary Art. So we're very fortunate to have him here. And above all, we're very proud of the fact that he has an MFA from Stanford University. He's currently the Dean of Graduate Studies at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and his talk today is Conduct Your Blooming Artist Projects in the Noise and Whip of the Whirlwind. Arnold.
Hi, thanks. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm overwhelmed with the number of folks who've come. It's always wonderful for me to return to the Bay Area, which is so formative to my being an artist, and I'm excited to be on the panel with people who I've wanted to meet for a long time, and also people who I've known for a long time who probably without them I might not be standing here in front of you, actually. So for Hung Lu and Rennie, thanks a lot. And also, thanks Mark Levin for inviting me to speak to you today. Let me see if I understand how this slide thing works. Oh yeah. So I'm just gonna start because I don't have that much time up here, but the title of this talk refers to a phrase from a 1968 poem by Gwendolyn Brooks that is an instructional love letter on survival in the face of daily antagonisms. Most of the artists I will refer to teach in universities because I want to touch on my current experience as well. I found that while women and other marginalized communities are finding a place in academia, that the university as an institution with much power needs to be questioned as well. In general, power needs to be questioned. There are scenarios that are enacted within universities that set marginalized communities against each other. Some universities have systematized practices that run contrary to the demand for artists to be recognized widely in order to receive tenure. Just last week, I heard that a prominent academic and administrator said in reference to faculty concerns that there should be no whining on the yacht. Doesn't this sound classist, this lack of empathy, when we know that not everyone is treated equally? I teach at an art school that is over 150 years old, and just a few years ago, or actually just a year ago, SAIC hired their first female president. When 65 to 70% of our MFA students are female, this fact points to a system in which women are hired to support male leaders, but are often not valued as leaders themselves. While the university is heavily informed by patriarchal and capitalist notions of power, I wonder how artists are situated in universities, art schools, and even residencies. Are these just places of survival? And if so, where do artists, especially women artists and people of color, begin to thrive? It makes sense to me to talk here about a range of artists and the examination of artworks that question the ethical conditions in which contemporary art is produced, because the West Coast has a distinct history with this conversation. The original feminist art program was developed by artist Judy Chicago and was launched in the fall of 1970 at Fresno State College. Later, Chicago and Miriam Shapiro reestablished the feminist art program at Cal Arts. Again later, the Feminist Studio Workshop was founded in Los Angeles in 1973 by Judy Chicago, Arlene Raven, and Sheila Levrant de Bretteville as a 2-year feminist art program. Women from the program were instrumental in finding and creating the Women's Building, the first independent center to showcase women's art and culture. These women developed artistic strategies and explored collaboration, empathy, and consciousness raising, and offered an alternative conversation about the roles of identity and subjectivity in cultural production. The legacy of this is an intergenerational cohort of women that places ethics and caring at the heart of their practices. Actually, this is one of my favorite slides because it's just, when I said that thing about the intergenerational cohort, this is it. And I hope that you do recognize some of the people from here, such as someone I went to grad school with, Stephanie Sejuco, who's now a professor at UC Berkeley, Carolyn Castano, who used to live here, Patty Chang is now teaching at USC, Martine Sims at CalArts, Francis Stark, who was at USC, Marin Hassinger and Senganan Guti, and Ottawa Owusu, who they don't live in LA anymore, but they were very important in LA. To LA, there's Mary Weatherford, Andrea Fraser, M.K. Guth, who's in Portland, Johanna Jackson, who was in San Francisco, and then she was in Portland, now she's in LA, and Wendy Red Star, who's in Portland, Oregon. In 1991, the first exhibition I saw in San Francisco was a survey of queer art curated by Nayland Blake and Liz Coates at New Langton Arts. That exhibition contained 2 paintings by Monica Maioli. In the first, an interior scene, 2 men copulate on a bed. One is half watching a TV screen, presumably a porn video, in the background. Part of a series of works created in dialogue with a gay male friend, the painting depicts scenes from actual events, stories Maioli's friend had told her, which she then documented. In another painting, a group of men stand pissing on a man lying in a bathtub in a mysterious nighttime ritual. Painted partially from photos, the paintings produce a sense of recreated events, of secrecy and inaccessibility, of a history now endangered or slipping away. Maioli's artwork examines the relationship between physicality and consciousness, expressed through the documentary sexual image. Through her intense and explicit imagery, piss, pain, isolation, deprivation, and suffocation, Maioli weaves a narrative of community, solitude, personal experience, and shared imagination. Maioli says of her work, "I think of the body as the vehicle and interpreter of experiences and container of consciousness. It's challenging to work within the figurative continuum because of the weight of historical precedents and the objectification of the body that has created disassociation between the viewer and the subject depicted. My use of sexuality revolves around the desire to stimulate a visceral response in the viewer to the actualities of our physical nature. S&M, which has been the dominant form of sexuality that I employ visually, is useful to me as it highlights the psychological nature of sexuality and consciousness." The exploration of community and collaboration in intimate relationships to the body is paramount in the more than 40-year careers of Senganan Guti and Marin Hassinger. Working in post-civil rights Los Angeles in the 1970s, both women were especially focused on the presence of the Black female body, the social and physical limits of the body, and gender and race through abstract, sculptural, and improvisational performances. Nguti's early projects led to her long-standing collaboration with Marin Hassinger, who often activates Nguti's nylon sculptures by performing within them. Sculptor and performance artist Marin Hassinger has created images that refer to nature as a complex psychological space for political and personal transformation. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Hassinger sought out alternative spaces in which to show her works, such as abandoned buildings, construction sites, and vacant lots. Her experimentation extends beyond materials and venues to encompass collaboration with other artists as part of a radical Black avant-garde in Los Angeles. Here, actually, this is a present-day Marin Hassinger performing one of Senganan Guti's choreographies. Besides collaborating with each other, Nguti and Hassinger also collaborated with artists such as David Hammonds, Ulysses S. Jenkins, and Franklin Parker, who were also based in LA at the time. The social arena of collaboration and the negotiation of power within community can also be seen in the work of M.K. Guth, a Portland, Oregon-based artist who has continually explored how we orient ourselves in a larger social and spatial landscape. Guth's Instructions for Drinking with a Friend is a public performance occurring 4 times each day within an art space. Select visitors drink whiskey together in the space, following instructions provided by the artist. The gallery installation also features vignettes of found and handcrafted objects, each of which corresponds to other choreographed performances, including in every sculptural still life is an artist book with instructions for the performance, as well as recipes, images, drawings, and text to guide each experience. In Guth's work, participants are prompted to question where exactly the artwork exists. Is it located in the object, the performance, or the more liminal context of the galleric space, which functions simultaneously as a site of presentation, performance, dining hall, and tavern? By engaging in multiple materials and arenas, Colleen Smith roots her work firmly within the discourse of mid-20th century experimental film. Drawing from structuralism, third world cinema, and science fiction, she makes things that deploy the tactics of these disciplines while offering a phenomenological experience for spectators and participants. The Black Love procession was first performed in response to an artwork showing the outline of the body of murdered Michael Brown exhibited at a gallery in Chicago's Bronzeville neighborhood. Smith felt that the gallery was filled with work that was violently offensive. She met with a group of artists and all determined to create an event that was an offering instead of a protest. We just wanted to tell our folk that we love them, said Smith. This love came in the form of the Black Love procession, a literal translation of their intention and a way to honor the losses to the Black community that have been felt so strongly while also creating a hopeful environment. The parade ended with the hanging of the banner on the site of a high school, followed by a celebratory fireworks display. So I know I'm probably coming close to time now, so I want to wrap this up with a project called the I Am Portfolio that uses what I've been trying to talk about here, which is a set of feminist tactics for collaboration, consciousness raising, community building, and dissemination outside the art gallery. The portfolio is a suite of posters by Black male artists addressing the recent violence against Black men and disregard for their lives in the United States. These posters are available as free downloads from the website of artist Lewis Cameron. Each of the artists represented in the portfolio works on exhibiting the works as well, and through the group effort, the portfolio has shown in St. Louis, Missouri, Richmond, Virginia, Warsaw, Poland, and the Baltic Center in England. I put this in here because Lewis, who did his undergrad at USC, I feel really learned from being around these feminist tactics and professors who were teaching at the time. I also contributed to this portfolio with this image, which is a photograph of my hands holding a book from my collection. And this particular book is Stefano Harney's and Fred Moten's The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study, which draws on the theories and practices of the Black radical tradition as it supports, inspires, and extends contemporary social and political thought and aesthetic critique. The book contains an essay by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten that everyone who takes part in any type of institution, but especially the university, needs to think about. In their essay, The University and the Undercommons, Stefano Harney and Fred Moten wrote that the only possible relationship to the university today is a criminal one. Undercommons is their term, and as a concept, it describes the kind of work, space, and relationship that we might seek to practice in relationship to the institution. The Undercommons is a place of refusal rather than a critique. Refusal of the terms and conditions that are offered as our only options or choices, or to quote Harney and Moten again, not so much the abolition of prisons, but the abolition of a society that could have prisons, that could have slavery. The examples set by the artists who I just showed you, I've mentioned them because, sorry. I've mentioned them in this poetic line of Gwendolyn Brooks to conduct your blooming, because if we do want change, we have to be creative about creating ourselves. And I hope that as we go into the panel that follows, that we can go in a way that where we're learning together and we're learning to create the worlds that we want to live in. Thank you.
Thank you, Arnold, again for that insightful and inspiring keynote address that really sets the stage for our panel presentation today. Please, everyone, another round of applause for Professor Kemp. Hello, my name is Mark Levin, and I am the coordinator of ArtsWest, an innovative program based at Stanford's Bill Lane Center for the American West that aims to place a spotlight on the emerging issues in the arts and humanities in the West. Today, we gather to hear from a very distinguished group of experts on the topic of the legacy and prospects for Western women artists. Before I introduce our panel, I would like to just take a few moments to thank our partner today, the Minnesota Street Project, for supporting today's program. I also want to acknowledge our benefactors for ArtsWest, John and Catherine Debs, and Jeffrey Dauber, whose generosity make these exciting programs a reality. Our panel today has 5 participants. I will be introducing them in the order they are seated on the stage. Will the panelists please come up to the stage? Each panelist will deliver opening remarks in the order that I introduced them, followed by a moderated exchange. Due to the logistical challenges and time constraints, we will not have audience Q&A. However, we invite the audience to come up to the stage after the program closes, and you can ask questions directly of the panelists, but give us a chance to take some group photographs first, please. The first panelist today is my colleague, Claudia Schmuckli. On my left, Claudia will be our moderator today. She is curator in charge, contemporary art and programming at the Fine Arts Museum of San Francisco. Previously, she was director and chief curator of the Blaffer Art Museum at the University of Houston and has held past professional positions at the Museum of Modern Art and the Guggenheim Museum in New York. Kate Kolvitz is a founding and leading member of the Guerrilla Girls since 1985. The Guerrilla Girls are an anonymous feminist activist collective of artists devoted to fighting sexism and racism within the art world. To remain anonymous, members don gorilla masks and use pseudonyms that refer to deceased female artists. The group is credited with sparking dialogue and bringing international attention to issues of inequality within the arts. Rennie Pritikin is the chief curator of San Francisco's Contemporary Jewish Museum. Previously, he held professional positions at the Fine Arts Collection of UC Davis, the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, and the New Langton Arts in San Francisco. He is the founder of the National Association of Artists Organizations and has taught art administration at the California College of the Arts, San Francisco State University, and the New School for Social Research. Hung Lu was born in the People's Republic of China and grew up under the Maoist regime. She was one of the first Chinese artists to establish a notable career in the West after receiving her MFA from UC Davis in 1986. Lu's paintings and prints make use of Chinese and American historical photographs, particularly those of women, children, and refugees as subject matter. She has received numerous awards, including 2 painting fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, and is represented in the collections of the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, Whitney Museum of American Art, and the National Gallery of Art. She is Professor Emerita of Art at Mills College, where she has taught since 1990. Lastly, Claudia Altman-Siegel is the director of Altman-Siegel Gallery in San Francisco. She is one of San Francisco's leading next-generation contemporary art dealers and represents a roster of global emerging talent such as Trevor Paglen, Sarah Vanderbeek, and Emily Wardle. Prior to opening her own gallery, Altman-Siegel was a visionary leader at the Loring Augustine Gallery in New York. I now turn the program over to my colleague and our moderator, Claudia Schmuckley.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. It's a real honor to be here today. Thank you so much for the invitation, Mark, and thank you so much for the Bill Lane Center for the American West for putting on this panel. We received the invitation to participate in 2017, and I don't know if all of you know, but the Merriam-Webster Dictionary Company has declared 2017 the year of feminism. The word of the year was feminism. So I thought it was a very appropriate timing for us to consider this. And you may think that the reason why feminism was the word of 2017 was because of all the women mobilizing across the world in resistance and in protest to the change in political situation. But while that certainly was true, one of the main reasons is because it was the most searched word in the dictionary in that year, which I think points to a very interesting conundrum, and one that I hope we'll also get to today, which is that so many people have insecurities when it comes to the term feminism, and obviously a lot of them, millions of them, refer to the dictionary for help, for definition, to define maybe their own relationship to the term, to find out what it was in the first place, we don't know. But obviously there is a renewed interest and urgency for us to consider the term and to do so collectively as a community. The fact that we've had such overwhelming response to this panel today demonstrates to me that there is a real deep felt need for this community to have the conversation that we're having today. And what I'm really excited about is that we have an incredibly diverse group of participants that presents, that brings to the table very different perspectives. And I hope that all of them will provide ample fodder for our ensuing conversation. Each panelist has been asked to present a 10-minute presentation, and I will let them get to it very quickly. And they will range, as you can see, from the macro to the micro, talking about systemic injustice, not only in relationship to women. And thank you, Arnold, for your wonderful keynote speech, which has put the question into a broader perspectives of social justice, which is integral to how we talk about feminism today. So we're very excited to have Katja Kollwitz with us today. I think I speak for all of us on the panel that we're slightly star-crushed to have a Guerrilla girl with us. So, but of course, the Guerrilla girls have a history of advocating for women in the arts that is so instrumental to where we are today. And in her presentation, she will definitely talk about the larger systemic injustices and also point out and point to modes of resistance that they have enacted, but also that they encourage us to enact on a daily basis in our practices as artists, curators, teachers, etc. And we're very excited to have that conversation, but also ranging sort of to the micro, to personal experience, and to case studies of what it was to be a woman in the art world. Hung Lu is going to speak to her experience, and in particular, we'll talk about two women that she identifies as role models for her formation as both a woman, an artist, and especially a teacher in today's academic environment. And obviously also blended with a rich history as an immigrant and all the complications that come therewith. Rennie Pritkin is also going to speak about exemplary women that have shaped the cultural landscape here in San Francisco and the Bay Area, singling out the achievements of women who have been foundational to both the founding of institutions, schools, but also the preserving of the legacy of artists' careers. So you will get that spectrum as well. And then, of course, Claudia Altman-Siegel is going to talk about her experience as a aspiring gallerist in the New York art world and how that has shaped her formation and her vision for her gallery that she opened here in San Francisco, and hopefully also talking a little bit about the market perspective in all of this. So as you can see, we have a rich menu of topics to choose from for our conversation later on, and I'm really excited for all of us to delve into the conversation. As you can see, the purpose of this panel is twofold. It's both celebratory to a certain extent in singling out the achievements of women without whom we wouldn't be where we are today, but also critical, of course, in sort of looking back at how difficult it was for women to come to this point where we are now, which is still not where we need to be, needless to say. And also, I think I'm really glad you brought in the term of refusal, a point of refusal where we are to accept the status quo for what it is, and to keep working towards broader equality across the board, not only in the art world, but also in the world at large. I do want to thank Mark and his team for doing a lot of legwork for us, and I want to honor that work by showing you just a suite of slides put together by Surabi Balakhandar that is looking at certain statistics about the representation of women in museum collections here in the West, and also the sort of division of labor in museums and where it breaks down across male and female lines. Needless to say, we all know that statistics and numbers are fraught with problems, so please do take these with a grain of salt. But a lot of work went into compiling this research, and so I do want to share it with you. And when it's opportune, we may come back to it. But could you show me the first slide, please, just to give you a sense of where we're at? Oh, I do have, sorry, my job. So just to give you a sense for which museums were, being looked at, major Western art museums that were identified by ArtsWest were the Vancouver Art Gallery, the Seattle Art Museum, Tacoma Art Museum, the museum that I work at, the Fine Arts Museum of San Francisco, the Contemporary Jewish Museum, SF MoMA, the Getty, LACMA, LA MoCA, the Nevada Art Museum, Phoenix Art Museum, and Denver Art Museum. So this is sort of like a sampling of major museums that have made it into the study. And as to be expected, the representation of women in the collection is rather modest, shall we say. to use a euphemism. On average at 15%. You can see there are certain instances where the data wasn't available, and I should say that our researcher was very clear about the limitations that have been put on her research, and I just share them with you so you don't draw the wrong conclusions. All the data was culled from publicly available and accessible databases, so not necessarily internal data that was provided by the museums. Some of them were very searchable, some of them were not so searchable, so when there's no data available, that is why this shows up that way. Not, of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that these museums don't have women in their collection, but you can still see an overall tendency that is unsatisfying. This is a snapshot just of 1 year, so again, to be taken with a grain of salt. And while I was thrilled to see that the San Jose Museum supposedly had 100% rate of women in the artists, I don't think that's necessarily true, because the last time I checked, the Propeller group was a collective of 3 men, so somehow that, that statistic got skewed. But still, well, it is, yeah, it is a solo. But you know, what's interesting to note just here really quickly is that a lot of the museums that that have a significant percentage of solo or host solo exhibitions by women artists, as well as have also a significant percentage of women on leadership staff. And that is particularly true. Hang on, let me go back one more thing. Obviously, the Phoenix Art Museum, the Vancouver Art Museum, Contemporary Jewish Museum, Seattle Art Museum, Nevada Art Museum all have female directors, and obviously that is not necessarily a coincidental statistic. Here is a short comparison, and again, you know, sort of to be taken with a measure, because the comparative study that is being thrown into the mix here is from 2013. I'm sure the numbers have since changed and probably sort of, you know, increased a little bit in percentage. But across the board, you can see that we're still looking at numbers of artworks and intersections at 15%, 41% for solo or duo exhibitions by women, and 38% of museums with a female director. Compared to 30 in 2013. And so here's just sort of a snapshot of the overall results for you to keep in mind and remember as part of the work that has been done in preparation for this panel. Okay, but without further ado, now I would like to hand over the word to Käthe Kollwitz.
There is a good principle. First of all, can everyone hear me clearly? Okay. There is a good principle that created order, light, and man, and an evil principle that created chaos, darkness, and women. Pythagoras, 6th century BC. Girls begin to talk and stand on their feet sooner than boys because weeds grow more quickly than good crops. Martin Luther, 1533. I consider women writers, lawyers, and politicians as monsters, nothing but 5-legged calves. The woman artist is merely ridiculous, but I am in favor of the female singer and dancer. Auguste Renoir, Impressionist painter. Dear group of communists, you're the strongest bunch of bitches gang together ever seen in world of art. Don't think to career you might make at 80. Best work of art a woman or girl can make is in bed making love and maybe procreate non-idiot females. Feminism is reason for highest number of AIDS casistics in United States of America. Thank to you, bitch feminists, if weakest men become gay, a woman can be genius. Do you remember the Holy Virgin, you damn bunch of whores? Answer me if you have the courage, bunch of bitches. A letter to the Guerrilla Girls from an Italian art critic. So, I'm one of the founding members of the Guerrilla Girls, and I've been involved in pretty much everything the group has done. And we've been to San Francisco, the Bay Area, several times, not for a few years. And it's great to be back here, but it's a very tough time, as we all know, in our weaponized country. And I'm sure that lots of you are angry, as we are, that Donald Trump has the US nuclear codes. So I was thinking maybe it's time to let out a collective scream. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Good scream you got there. Here's a poster that we did right after the election. President Trump announces new commemorative months. And unfortunately, some of this has already happened since we did this poster and just, carried it in all the marches the last few years. Under Trump, we're afraid that these celebratory months for incredible American groups will change. African American History Month could be replaced by Ku Klux Klan Month, and LGBTQ Pride Month could be Pray the Gay Away Month. The panel today examines the challenges, faced by women and women-identified artists in a system that's set up to exclude them. So I'm going to start with our very own story, the story of the Guerrilla Girls. So imagine you were a young artist, a young woman artist in the 1980s, pissed off about the lack of opportunities for women and people of color in the art world and beyond. Imagine you went to a protest outside the Museum of Modern Art after it opened a survey of contemporary art that included only 13 women out of 169 artists. Imagine you saw immediately that not one person passing by cared. That was your aha moment. You realized there had to be a better way, a more contemporary, creative, in-your-face way to break through people's belief that museums and galleries knew best and that there was no discrimination in art. Imagine you had a new idea about how to construct political art, to twist an issue around and present it in a way that hadn't been seen before. Imagine you had a meeting, named yourselves Guerrilla Girls, passed the hat around to pay for printing, then you snuck around New York in the middle of the night, pasting up those game-changing posters, and all hell broke loose. Who knew that our work would cause a major crisis of conscience about diversity in the art world, a subject museums, collectors, and critics had ignored and denied for a long, long time? Now it's a no-brainer. You can't tell the story of a culture without all the voices in it. So those first posters led to countless others: billboards, street actions, videos, workshops, performances, not just about discrimination in art. And this is one of our very first posters that we put up in 1985 when we started. And you can see how unbelievably low the numbers were at that time. And of course, this is our most well-known poster, Do Women Have to Be Naked to Get into the Met Museum? And by the way, this particular count is not from 1989 when we first did this poster. This one is from 2012. So things have not changed as much as we would like them to. We also do stuff about pop culture, the anatomically correct Oscar. He's white and male, just like the guys who win, and political and social issues. So here's a street poster we did about hatred of and violence against women that appeared on the streets of Montreal on the 20th anniversary of one of their worst mass murders ever, when a gunman claiming he was fighting feminism killed 14 women studying engineering at the École Polytechnique. So our poster is a graffiti wall of sexist hate speech through the ages, including Confucius, who said, 100 women are not worth a single testicle, to Pat Robertson, who said, feminism is a socialist, anti-family movement that encourages women to leave their husbands, kill their children, destroy capitalism, and become lesbians. When you really look at all these kinds of quotes and everything we hear today, so much hate speech about every group, of course, it's still okay to say really nasty, abusive things about women that wouldn't be tolerated publicly if said about other groups. And almost all women and many men and trans people have been sexually harassed and are abused in the workplace. Guys in power do this, and other guys in power have let them get away with it over and over and over again. Now many of us are speaking out. We're telling our stories. We're saying Me Too. We're saying time's up. And in the art world, we're saying not surprised. So last week, I was in Washington, D.C. for the opening of a show that the Guerrilla Girls are in at the Hirshhorn Museum. And I had a couple of hours free, and it was making me nervous being so close to Trump, so I certainly didn't want to pass by the White House. So I went to the National Portrait Gallery and stood in line with an incredibly fantastic, excited, diverse group of hundreds and hundreds of people to see the just installed Obama portraits. And right around the corner from Obama, there were a bunch of paintings of other recent presidents. Does anyone here know who did Bill Clinton's portrait in the National Portrait Gallery? That's Chuck Close. So as we say in the art world, not surprised. Or we could also say, abusers united. So these days, you find the Guerrilla Girls on the streets of, oh God, Istanbul, Bologna, doing museum interventions in Brazil, Minneapolis, satirizing museum diversity, the low amount of museum diversity in European museums at Whitechapel Gallery in London, and also running a complaints department at Tate Modern London, where thousands and thousands of people came to complain. And we are just about to go to Hong Kong. I brought this here today. No one's seen this yet, only our group has seen it because we're still kind of working it out. But we were asked by the Asian Art Archive in Hong Kong to do a little intervention, and we decided to make it about the Art Basel Hong Kong Art Fair itself, which is now one of the biggest ones in the world. So our piece says, it's a quote from Confucius, "If you keep women away, they get resentful." And then there's statistics about last year's 2017 fair, and then we're asking people, we have all these takeaways on a little shelf and stuff, where you can do your own count, take it all around the fair, go wherever you want, and come back and put all the results up on the wall. So the Guerrilla Girls love art and artists, and there's so many amazing artists, and luckily artists are always going to make work no matter what kind, and no matter how hard it is to get the work out. And we're so lucky about that, because if artists didn't just keep making work against all odds, we'd have no culture. And there are many people inside art institutions and galleries, many here today, trying to change the system. But, the art world also has lots of posers, snobs, gamblers, tax dodgers, and even criminals. The art market is unregulated. In fact, it's been described as the fourth largest black market in the world after drugs, guns, and diamonds. Which brings me to a campaign we began in New York and now are doing all over the place about two of the issues that are really preoccupying the Guerrilla Girls right now: income inequality and billionaires controlling art.
So the world of artists is great, but the art world sucks. The super rich are controlling the museums, sitting on the boards.
Power is being centralized into these few rich people. Like, it's really about the 1%.
Unfortunately, the art world right now appears to be about money and about the production of luxury items.
Billionaires are making more and more and more, and their taste controls which artists get the big bucks and get the opportunities and get the shows. We're planning to sneak around New York with the Illuminator. So we'll be starting out in Chelsea, and we hope to then go to the Whitney. So we had this idea to do something we could do really fast around New York and put these stickers up. Some of the stickers are about art galleries, about billionaires, billionaire collectors, and about museums. So we wanted to put them up where they belong, on the big galleries, on the museums, and give them out to people, especially so they could do the same thing. And it seemed like a great idea. Call people together, just put the word out, see who comes, and just run around the streets and put these things up and bother people.
It's going to be a Saturday in Chelsea. People walking around feeling really good about having seen all this inspiring art, and all of a sudden they're going to see the wall above start talking to them, and it's going to say, "Dear art collector." We completely get collecting art is so expensive. We really understand why you can't afford to pay all your employees a living wage. The wall is going to talk to them. Every time we put something up, people would go bananas. Some people would love it, some people would hate it. So we would sort of work in that space. It's really very productive to provoke people to think about things. And we discovered early on that if you could make someone who disagreed with you laugh, you had a hook inside their brain. Once you were in there, you just might be able to change their minds about things.
So there have been, over all these years, now almost 33 years, there have been over 55 members of the Guerrilla Girls, and some are living in the West, actually. Some have been members for a week, others for decades. We've been diverse in age, sexual orientation, and class, and from many ethnic backgrounds: South Asian, Asian, African American, Latinx, European, etc. We've had cis and trans members from the beginning, and we have always believed in an intersectional feminism that fights for all human rights. Our group works the way artists have always worked, exploring issues and seeing what we can come up with that might have the power to change people's minds. We craft our work in complex ways, but our motto is pretty simple: speak up and don't stop. And several years ago, oops, where did we, I did something wrong here. Wait. I'm sorry, I'm just out of order. It's in order, I'm out of order, as usual. Okay, so several years ago, we gave our first ever commencement address, actually at the Art Institute of Chicago. And it was in front of 4,000 cheering people and a whole bunch of very angry parents who complained later. And we wrote a manifesto for this, and it kind of became our manifesto that we just kept referring to and kept talking and kept saying. So we altered it a little and made it into a video manifesto.
The Guerrilla Girl's Guide to Behaving Badly, which you have to do most of the time in the world as we know it.
Be a loser. The world of art doesn't have to be an Olympics where a few win and everyone else is forgotten. The art market and its hyper-competitive celebrity culture makes everyone but the stars feel like failures. But there's another world out there that's not about raging egos, a world of artistic cooperation and collaboration. That's the one we joined, and we invite you to join it too. Let's make trouble together.
Be crazy! Political art or activism that points to something and says this is bad is just preaching to the converted. Instead, try to change people's minds and do it in some unforgettable way. A trick we learned is humor helps you fly under the radar. If you can get people who disagree with you to laugh at an issue, you have a hook right into their brain. Once there, you have a much better chance to convert them.
Be anonymous. Sometimes you gotta speak out publicly, but sometimes it works even better to speak out anonymously. Now this has its disadvantages, like working your whole life without getting any credit, but it has lots of advantages too. Our anonymity, for example, keeps the focus on the issues and away from our personalities. The mystery of who we might be draws lots of attention to the issues we promote. Plus, you won't believe what comes out of your mouth while wearing a gorilla mask.
Be an outsider. Even if you're working inside the system, we say act like an outsider. Seek out the understory, the subtext, the overlooked, and the downright unfair. Then expose it. Jam your culture. Remake your institution.
Just do one thing. If it works, do another. If it doesn't, do another anyway. Don't be paralyzed if you don't get it right every time. Just keep chipping away. We promise that bit by bit, your efforts will add up to something effective.
Artists, don't make only expensive art that billionaire art collectors can afford. Curators, don't exhibit only the expensive art your trustees donate. Let's have more cheap art that everyone can own, like books, zines, music, and movies, like our posters.
Show museums tough love. It's unethical that wealthy art collectors who invest lots of money in art can become museum trustees overseeing institutions that in turn validate their investments. It's a lousy way to write and preserve our history.
Demand ethical standards inside museums. No more conflicts of interest or insider trading. No more cookie-cutter collections of art that cost the most. Convince art collectors their collections are inferior with only work by white male artists. Don't let museums perpetuate this version of art and power with a few tokens thrown in. Make sure your favorite museum casts a wider net and collects the whole story of our culture.
Whether you work in a museum or a classroom, don't teach an art history constructed by corrupt institutions. Do like we did. Write your own.
Complain, complain, complain. Be a creative complainer. Be a professional complainer. Don't assume people know what's missing from museums. Remind them how many modern and contemporary art collections still contain less than 15% females and artists of color.
Use the F word, feminism. We think it's crazy that so many people who believe in the tenets of feminism are still afraid to call themselves feminists. Feminism doesn't get the respect it deserves. Women's rights, civil rights, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender rights, and Black Lives Matter are the great human rights movements of our times.
Feminists like us who believe in intersectionality fight for all human rights. No one is free until everyone is free.
Feminism is changing the world. It's revolutionizing human thought, given many people lives their great-grandparents could never have imagined. But there's still so much work to do. There are so many countries worldwide where LGBTQ people and women have little or no human rights.
90% of transgender employees have faced discrimination or harassment at work. In the US, no federal law protects them, even though nearly 80% of voters support such a law. Then there's rampant sexism in the tech industry, including the harassment of female gamers. And what about the gender earning gap that the US Congress refuses to move against?
Violence and abuse against women, gay, and transgender people is still a huge international problem. From gang rape in India to kidnappings in Nigeria to sexual slavery by ISIS to the negligible punishment given out for domestic violence in America. Trans women are assaulted and even murdered in the U.S.
But despite all this bad news, feminist resistance movements are exploding all over the world. Let's make the F word feminism the F word for the future. Let's all join together with feminists on the right side of history.
All right, thank you.
Jenny, do you want to go next? Yeah? I'm afraid if I start asking questions now, you'll never get to speak.
So I'm taking the opportunity to celebrate women who have educated me over the last 40 years of my career on the West Coast. How does this work? I don't know. Okay. So Amalia Mesa Baines, who I believe was the first woman of color to get a MacArthur Award, was and has been a mentor to me. She was a key figure at Galleria de la Raza and Mission Cultural Center. She was a key figure on the founding board of Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, a founder of the art department at Cal State Monterey Bay, and a '92 MacArthur winner, and the most articulate leader of the Raza generation. I'd like to acknowledge Leah Levy, who's the executive director of the J. DeFeo Foundation. And what is amazing and hard to even comprehend is that Jay would have been lost to history if not for the steadfast work of Leah. As many of you may know, that Jay's masterpiece, The Rose, was locked up literally behind plaster in the conference room at the San Francisco Art Institute for about 20 years and forgotten by all but a few friends. And through Leah's work, Jay, as we all know, is now recognized for her amazing contribution to American contemporary art. Viola Fry, one of the great ceramicists of Northern California, and Squeak Carnwith, who fortunately is still with us, did an amazing thing when Viola was still alive. They were together and realized that they were getting older and neither of them had children. And they decided to merge their estates for the benefit of future artists and started the Artist Legacy Foundation, which gives $25,000, originally $25,000, probably more now, fellowships, kind of lifetime achievement awards to artists. And the list includes Judith Linares this year, Jim Nutt, Donna Dennis, Peter Saul, Kathy Butterly. Ashaki Bombani had a gallery for about a decade in San Francisco that was the first and, as far as I know, only gallery dedicated to supporting African and African diaspora artists in the Bay Area. And she was an active board member, again, at Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. Ruth Asawa, who most of us know, not only an increasingly respected artist, but the CETA Arts Employment Movement was her idea. She was a founder of San Francisco School of the Arts, one of the founders of Scrap, Art Materials Salvage, and founder of the Friends of the Urban Forest. So an amazing figure. I particularly want to talk about Ann Folk, who's a friend in Seattle. Her whole career has been in Seattle. And when I teach, I taught for 11 years in the curatorial practice program at CCA, and I always used Ann as a model because my students all wanted to know about how to get a job in a museum. And Anne is somebody I have consummate respect for because she never thought like that. She made up her own jobs, and as she did that, created institutions that enriched the Seattle and Washington art scene and the lives of many, many, many artists in the area. She was a founder of Andor, which was the original alternative artist space in Seattle in 1974. While she was there, she had the idea to start a for-profit company called Art Tech, which became a nonprofit company to support Andor. She founded Artist Trust, which is still going, which is a statewide artist service organization that also gives grants to artists every year in the state of Washington. She made this up out of thin air and got the government to go along with it. A few years later, she heard about this new thing called the internet and started ArtWire, which was the first art chat room. That was 1989. She was a co-founder of Community Democracy Workshop, which is a salon in Seattle. Founder of Penny U, Public Conversations in Town Hall in Seattle, 2014. She was the first executive director of Grants Makers in the Arts in 1999. And amazingly now, in her 70s, she's still going like crazy, but she's also founded the Ginny Delaccio Project, which is a think tank for sort of retired artists and art administrators to think about artists, art administrators, and aging. I'd like to acknowledge someone dear to many of us here, Lee Markopoulos, who passed away last year in a tragic accident. She was my colleague at curatorial practice at CCA, and was a brilliant leader, and among many other professional accomplishments, created or led and defined the curatorial practice program. And to just pick a few of the alumni who are working brilliantly throughout the world, Lee Train, Tanya Zimbardo, Joseph Del Pesco, Anna Gritz, Xiaoyu Wang, Heidi Robin, Amanda Hunt, Jessica Silverman, Dina Pugh, and many others. We miss her dearly. Constance Penley was a personal mentor, early feminist film scholar, founder of Camera Obscura magazine, part of the intellectual leadership of 80 Langton Street Gallery that shaped my career and my thinking, and currently a film professor at UC Santa Barbara, who's written extensively about popular culture, especially Star Trek, and pornography. Dear friend Constance Llewellyn, who's dedicated her career to giving national and international attention to Bay Area artists, longtime curator at the Berkeley Art Museum, has done shows about Ant Farm, Teresa Cha, Howard Fried, Paul Koss, Bruce Naumann's California Formative Years, and most recently State of Mind, New Conceptual Art in California in the 70s. This is someone who really needs to be talked about and understood more. I never knew Morley, but she was the founding director of SF MoMA, then the SF Museum of Art. And she was, the more I read about her, the more I'm amazed at how ahead of her time and brilliant she was. Director of MoMA from 35 to 58. Throughout her tenure, she fought for inclusion, racial, international, and gender. Between 1930, dig this number, Between 1935 and 1940, she presented over 40 one-person shows by women at SF MoMA. She brought Guernica to SF MoMA in 1939 over the objections of Republicans on her board. For their 50th anniversary, SF MoMA put a lot of her correspondence out, and there was a letter defending her bringing Guernica to San Francisco that was one of the most moving pieces of correspondence I've ever seen. Just saying, essentially, if not now, when? If not us, who? And she also fought for the rights of intern Japanese artists, especially Mineo Kubo, and championed African-American artists such as Sergeant Johnson. Almost unknown is Marguerite Wildenheim. Again, I didn't know her, but my museum did a show partially about her contribution. She was a great potter, and most particularly, she founded and led Pond Farm, which still exists as a park, state park. That was an artist retreat, an art center about an hour north of San Francisco in the 40s and 50s, often called the Grand Dame of potters. Many of the most successful programs in the Bay Area have been funded by Barbara Osher, extraordinary philanthropist in town, one of many. Particularly any Swedish artists who get to come to this country are usually supported by Barbara. I want to acknowledge three great feminist art historians who helped shape the vocabulary and architecture of the thinking of that, and I think they're in the room, or some of them: Wanda Korn, Whitney Chadwick, and Moira Roth. Thank you. My last slide is women who gave their youth in the Bay Area to building alternative spaces. Judy Moran at New Langton Arts, Courtney Fink at Southern Exposure Gallery.
Thank you, Rennie. And maybe another museum person that is completely under-recognized here and elsewhere that I would like to add to that list is Germaine McKagy, whose archives have not really been maintained or explored or published. And she used to be the director of the Museum of the Legion of Honor and also instrumental at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, a pioneer and a visionary in redefining how we think and present exhibitions, but yet a figure that is still deserving of recognition. So, Kyung, would you like to share?
Okay. Before I show my image, I have to say I have a cold, so I will try my best. But I came from China, but it's so lucky to be here, to be honored, to be humbled. First, I got to UC San Diego after 4 years of waiting for my Chinese passport. But UCSD waiting for me. And Moira was one of the key people who supported me and who was the first one visit my studio when I arrived. Finally, this Chinese artist might never show up in the US. I showed up. She was the first one visit me. I got the great opportunity, privilege to meet so many feminist art historians, artists. My first New York show was reviewed by Arlene Raven for the Villager Voice. And then I was in Lucille Parr's book. And and I feel like so blessed. In China, I might have inner feminism because I refuse from a young age that women lesser than men. I refuse to say, I'm just a girl, I can do nothing. I will just always follow the man, behind man. But here, I really learned so much, and I feel it's a whole army. My first show a long time ago in Texas, just several years after I arrived in the US, my solo show, guess who showed up? Two Guerrilla girls in Texas. They came to my opening. They offered the bananas to me. I could not figure a way to preserve the bananas. I didn't want to eat them because that's something, they not just support women in the US, white women, they support anybody, the sisterhood of Guerrilla Girls. So thank you to our sisterhood. Anyway, I just always I give very brief kind of introduction of who I am, what my work is about. I call my work Summoning Ghost. Came up a number of years ago for my retrospective because what I'm really doing, I use historical photograph of those people who so-called anonymous, make them known, and the people who suffered, who struggled, who never important, like they nobody in history. I want to show, make them big face, make them visible. I grew up under Mao's regime. That's the kind of work we're supposed to do. We expect to do propaganda, and only about the great leader, the great party. And then during Cultural Revolution, when I sent it to the countryside, spent 4 years in the field, I did what I could, and I happened to have a camera of a friend's camera, 120 old camera, so I took some photographs of the peasant's life in China. And in public, we're supposed to do big billboard paintings, anything about the revolution. But secretly, I always want to do something I want to do. And so I finally, after got to US, I did like a Chinese immigrant and women at work and doing physical labor and refugees. And after earthquake, the survivors. So that's why it made me so connected to my first hero, my mentor. Also, I feel it's an art colleague, Dorothea Lange. It's just so happened that her archives is housed at the Oakland Museum of California. So I am a regular visitor to the archives, which the room is hiding in the farther corner back in the museum. You can never find it. Every time I needed to be escorted there, and sometimes the door painted just the same as the wall. But whenever I got there, turn off my phone, and going through binder after binder, her photographs, I fell through her lens. I started to travel with her, even though, many years ago, this is American Dust Bowl, those Okies. No, they were not too much different from those poor Chinese peasants, which I lived with, worked together in the field for 4 years. So, and of course, her most famous, really? I just got here, really? And her photograph, the grapes of breath, and made me doing a whole body of new work based on my American dust ball. The heart is the time. And the second, my second hero and my mentor and my predecessor, J.D. Phil. Mills, I took her position. And of course, Randy talked about this, famous for her roles and among so many different work. I just cannot believe that she could draw tripod so sexily, so lively. So I showed it to those student time, showed it to my, the slides time, showed it to students. And her work never flat, like Leah Levy always said, never flat, always there's some collage, there's some other dimension to it. So with her inspiration, I was teaching at the Mills when we reviewed the graduate students' files. And then I gave them, for example, one assignment used toilet paper roll, and they became so creative, anything, everything. And then they created almost like a Yoko Ono's piece. Everybody have to climb, look into the thing. That's when I climb up there. You can see how many people protect me before I fell down. I love my graduate students. They just, I think it's J.D. Phil doesn't have a hierarchy about any medium. So people use all kinds of things, making work from undergrad, making her Mexican-American identity very visible, use projection, painting, drawing, to the abstract, almost like a DeFeo-ish kind of work. And I invite former grads like Rosanna come to speak. Of course, here's Ronnie Pritikin there, talk to my graduate students. And we visited like a Deborah Oropolo studio, and we did Squeak, Chris Brown, and we did action painting. We just tried to have fun. And even after everybody graduated, we support each other's openings, different things. And after I retired, even the current teacher brought students to my studio. That's how mess when I was moving out. And look at the two chairs. No, I cleaned up with help. But look at the two chairs. The left one, the black one, was J.D. Phil's chair. I sat in the chair for years, finally broken. But I'd hate to throw it out. And the school gave me a new chair. I decided to pass on to my predecessor. I wrote to her, I said, this is what I got from J.D. Phil. I feel she has been with me all these years, almost a quarter century. So if I won't pass on to you, I hope you keep it. And it's like shrine. When I got to the studio, I got to her office, I'm sorry, I saw the frame. See the frame is 17 by 20 DeFeo. I found her frame and also the drawings of hers. So that frame with her drawing, the reproduction of drawing, hanging at my office for all those years, that I didn't pass on. I took to, sorry for that, but I felt the pair of eyes, not just J.D. Phil's, but all those, my friends from Deer, among Leah Mason Bean, we call each other sisters, from Carrie Mae Williams, Deborah Butterfield, everybody, I feel all my friends, Moira Ross here, and Whitney Chadwick. That's my dear American feminist eyes, protect me, blessing me, but also just accompany me for the rest of my life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hung. We all need those eyes. Claudia. So I have a slideshow that's going to play here, and it's all artworks that I personally have worked with or worked on over the years. It has nothing to do with what I'm going to say. It's just for some visual stimulation while I'm talking. It's kind of a mini bio and pictures. Hi, I'm Claudia Altman-Siegel, owner of Altman-Siegel Gallery. This panel is titled Women Who Transformed Art in the West, which I've been thinking about for a bit as the art world is really global these days. So I decided to take the title personally as someone who is working every day to transform art in the West through my exhibition program across the street. But the title also implies a subtext, which is inequity between men and women in art. As an art dealer, my role on this panel is to discuss the market and how that influences power in the art world. By doing this, I hope to raise your consciousness so that when you look at art, you will not only appreciate the artwork for its own merit, but also begin to understand how it came to be placed on the platform in front of you. Through this demystification, I want to give you the tools to be critical, to be able to notice when there's a lack of diversity in the exhibition you saw, and to consider your own power, to vote with your feet by specifically seeking out exhibitions of work by women artists. Maybe I should pause here for a second to acknowledge that what I'm saying bears true for diversity in general and can be applied to minority groups across the board, but for the purpose of the talk today, I'm going to focus on women. To begin, I think it would help to outline the different forces that contribute to an artist's success and explain the role of the gallery, which is just my area of expertise. We all know that artists get famous and their works can sell for a lot of money, but how does that happen? The gallery works as an agent for an artist in the way an actor might have an agent. For example, I represent 16 artists, 50% of whom are women. What we do is facilitate the business side of an artist's career, so this includes presenting bodies of new work at the gallery, but also organizing logistics involved in any of their shows at any other gallery or museum around the world. The gallery is the link between the artist studio and the outside world. So we introduce and represent an artist's work to collectors who might be interested in buying it, and also to curators, critics, and other art world professionals. Galleries can work at different levels, but often artists start with a gallery when they're quite young, sometimes even right out of grad school, and grow with them. Galleries have different aesthetic visions and reasons for deciding to work with an artist, but for the most part, successful artists have successful galleries behind them. For example, in 2015, the Art newspaper reported that nearly 1/3 of the major solo exhibitions held in the United States museums between 2007 and 2013 featured artists represented by just 5 major galleries. The gallery's goal is to spread the work widely and build a reputation for the artist. This is done through 2 main avenues: institutional recognition and the market. Ultimately, we want our artists to contribute to the canon of art history. In this, we're partners with museum curators and critics who can exhibit the work and write about it in a scholarly context. The gallery is responsible for building and maintaining a market for an artist's work, and the gallery and the artist are financially supported through sales of the artwork. As these 2 threads, market sales and curatorial support, come together, interest in an artist tends to grow. Power in the art world consolidates around the top of the market, and it becomes at this point quite exclusive. I have some market statistics that I thought would be interesting to share. According to the Global Art Market Report of 2017, produced by UBS and Art Basel, the United States has 40% of market share in global sales. So we as Americans have a lot of influence. Of the top 20 artists with the most solo exhibitions in 2016, there are 3 women: Cindy Sherman, Louise Bourgeois, and Rosemary Trockle. Since 2010, this number has increased by 1. The top-selling living artist, Gerhard Richter, has 8% of the market share, which is massive, and the 3rd top-selling artist with 2% of the market share is Yayoi Kusama, who is the only woman on the list of the top 20. From the top 20 highest prices realized at auction in 2016, none were artworks by women.
The most value comes from 1% of the market, which is very roughly illustrated here, and you can see that women artists are not very well represented. And this leaves us with the impression that art by women is not as valuable, right? That being said, in the art market, there's a fairly decent gender parity between male and female dealers, almost 50-50. And the #1 selling living artist and top exhibiting artist, Gerhard Richter, is currently represented by Marian Goodman. So it's not really accurate to say that the power lies in the hand of male dealers. Women dealers bear responsibility also. The issue, as I see it, is more of a general consciousness raising. The general ratio of gallery roster is 70% men to 30% women artists, if that. Galleries need to consciously choose to represent more women artists, and hopefully over time, if there's more women being promoted, the numbers at the top of the market will change. Let's talk about the patronage system for a minute. Where is the money coming from to make this market work? In the United States, art is funded almost entirely privately. There's very little public money available to institutions or to artists. Galleries are funded entirely through sales to their collectors, and artists are also paid a living wage through gallery sales. Museums are funded through ticket sales, galas and benefits, and gifts from donors and board members. Museum board members have a tremendous amount of influence on what is collected and seen in museums. Their decisions are quite often influenced by curators who work for the museum, and I'm sure Claudia and Rennie can address gender parity in this field too. But also these patrons give gifts to the museums from their own collections or start public foundations, and often their tastes are exposed once their collection becomes public. Once canonized as part of a museum collection, it's difficult to see the collection for what it is, a body of work accumulated by one person and representative of his tastes. So how do we influence patrons of the arts to prioritize gender parity in their collecting practices? We can exert social pressure if the collection is shown publicly, but usually this is a private practice and not open to public scrutiny. In the Bay Area, we have a large and young, wealthy class of people growing in the city. Of the top 10 large market cap companies in the United States, 7 are in the Pacific Northwest and 5 are in the Bay Area. Can we disrupt the current system and create a patronage system here that supports more diversity in the arts? What are the points of disruption in this system? Here are some ideas. Go see art. We need all the viewers we can get. Let's broaden the dialogue. Purchase work by women artists. Buying artwork is both good for your mind and your home, and also pays a living wage for the artist. The stronger an artist market, the more power they have. But most importantly, become a conscious viewer. Think about what you've seen. What are the ideas behind the work? What is the artist advocating? Think about who made it. Does the show really give you a full picture? How did this work get here? Who is in power at this venue? Don't get me wrong, artists of all genders and race make important, inspiring contributions, and we need all of them. And work by women is not necessarily better or worse. We just need to think about whether the picture is complete. What could have been added or subtracted to make the exhibition better? What voices are included and who is excluded? Hopefully, by becoming conscious viewers, we can begin to critique the current paradigm and make decisions that promote equality going forward. Kimberly Drew, who is a young African-American curator and social media manager for the Met, and also an activist for change in the art world, recently wrote, "We have to think about the radical possibilities of our own curiosities. It is these exact curiosities and eccentricities that will forge the record of our time." This symposium is titled Women Who Transformed Art in the West, and I am working on being one of those women. I call on all of you to join me as agents for change by being curious and critical viewers. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. Can you hear me? Great. Obviously, you've touched on one of the subjects that is also very dear and near to my heart, since I'm fairly new to the West, and also hopefully trying to define myself as some woman or a woman who can bring about some change in the context within which I operate. And since you did throw the gauntlet, I will answer. Since I do represent, the curatorial perspective for one of the major collecting institutions in this city, which does not have an excellent track record in representing women or artists of color. although we do have an incredibly diverse and inclusive collection. And so I've been sort of stunned upon walking or exploring the collection that on the one hand we have diversity and inclusion writ large into the DNA of our historic collections or collections of artifacts, but not necessarily so in that of the collection of our modern and contemporary art. So that is definitely an area that I'm very deeply committed to changing and exploring and expanding. But as Claudia and also as Kete Kollwitz has pointed out, there are really interesting institutional challenges that come along with that are tied to funding structures and institutional sort of legacies and support structures that always sort of have to be navigated to effect change from within. So in that way too, we have to sort of change interest, we have to educate viewers to broaden perspectives. All of these are the same mandates, but I would like to ask, and we can circle back to this later, but I would like to ask you who have sort of worked in the educational context, which I have too in my past job, how do you prepare sort of young artists or art historians or curators for the inequity of the field? I mean, obviously you want to encourage their creativity, you want to encourage their critical thinking, but as teachers and educators, like how do you prepare them for the reality of what is awaiting them once they graduate? How do you instill that anger, or if we don't want them to be angry, how do you instill, I'm just saying, some of us do, some of them. If you don't want them to be angry, how do you prepare them and weaponize them to go about their ambitions and careers with their eyes wide open? I mean, I would love to hear from you, Hong, and also Rennie. You've taught so long at CCA. If you address that, or have you addressed that in your curriculum, even if it's just sort of under a best practices umbrella, but does that come about?
You want to go first?
Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Personally, I really believe teaching art, just like maybe teaching other subjects, it's not about the technique, the skill. In China, we're very skillful, but I think, I really believe, first of all, you have to be a learned, aware citizen, not just a citizen of the United States, maybe more today, but a citizen of the world, which you care about. For example, the environmental issue, care about the immigration issue, care about a lot of things. Not that everything is so-called political art, but I think we are political beings. I really think humanity is at stake today. It's throughout the world. Are we still human beings? We care about each other. And so that way, I think not just coming to art school, especially graduate students, you're committed to make art. I completely understand that, but not aim at the success. It's like, look, so-and-so successful because he did this, that. There's no recipe. There's no recipe, there's no formula, there's no way, a secret to be successful. But I think if you could find in the first place why you want to be artist, and really not to be afraid of failure. And I remember there's a great book called Failure. I started last some years with a graduate seminar. I said, this is a book. We start with you teaching us failure. I said, yes, that's the book, very good. It's Whitechapel on contemporary art. And it was, what's not about it's not about the purpose to feel. It's about how to overcome all the, I would say sometimes superficial deadline, and sometimes award, sometimes what other people say, you pay attention, but you really know, you really understand why you're there. So I think a good teacher should probably be a person little older than most cases than your students, and share what you have learned by being artists, but also prepare them to unforeseen future, because every day, especially today, I don't know what today's news. You just never know after a few tweets what's going on, But what I'm saying is, be prepared to be artist who lives in this time, and I don't think that matters. It's you use video, you do abstract, you use sculpture. It's 3D, 2D performers. But overall, down deep, you have to really have this kind of awareness being artists today. I don't know what else.
Yeah, so I've taught primarily curatorial practice, and usually, not always, but usually the difficulty is people come because they're excited about the glamour and the power that they think curators have. So in some ways you have to break down that right away and explain that your job is 99% of the time saying no, and how hard that is and debilitating. But then you build back up to having them read and talk to enough smart people that they come to understand that it's a political position in a commercial, hyper-commercial industry, and they have to see their role in that as one where they have to take stances, and their work has to reflect values, and they have to be aware and conscious and thoughtful about how they'll feel after 30 or 40 years in the field about what they've contributed, and how complex and what an enormous responsibility it is.
But do you feel that sort of their professional sort of imbalanced, their starting line already is sort of like defined by imbalance in power. Is that something that you feel is being addressed in education?
I can't generalize. I mean, I've worked at one institution, CCA, which from the graduates that we've produced and the leadership, someone like Lee Markopoulos.
Right.
Yeah, it's the primary thing that we talk about, or when I was there, is, that there are multiple art worlds, and you can inhabit ones that are about money, and you can inhabit worlds that are about community. And you don't have to think about a job, you think about a career.
Because one of the things obviously that's become apparent through all these different presentations is that the system is something that has to be attacked from all sides, right? From within the educational institution, or also the educational institution per se, but also from the collector end, which is what you're sort of have been more recently ventured into. Have you already, I would love to hear you talk a little bit about initial responses that you have gotten to these rather recent campaigns, and what the the sort of reaction has been.
Well, you know, we kind of take these things all over the world, and the response is different in different places. But it seems clearer and clearer that institutions, the problem in the United States is museums don't have money. Everything they have to get from somebody. The things they're getting, and to get, you know, funders or their collectors to collect work or pay for something, often they do want the work they already have to be part of the museum. So the museum's responsibility then has to be to cast a wider net. Because 100 years from now, when we go into a museum, are we only going to see the 10 most expensive artists of each generation?
But I hope not, yeah.
Well, we are now. You know, I'm not saying that's all museums do, but if you look at their and they're trying, but without money at their own discretion. You know, there are people trying to turn these big ships around. So I think keeping up the pressure on these institutions is hugely important. And for young artists coming up, we don't need to tell them these things. They know all these things. I mean, let's get real. It's really hard to become financially successful as an artist, no matter who you are. You know, it's not just you know, this group thing or that group thing. It's very difficult. And then once you are successful, you're in this fancy world, which maybe isn't what your work is about or what you care is about. You know, artists put their whole life into everything they do. And they're not really creating fancy objects for wealthy people to own. They need that because you need to make a living but it's a fucked up system because of that.
Yeah.
So I don't know how to solve that system, but I think complaining is so important. You know, don't take it. Of course, join with people. There are different art worlds. I agree with that completely. There's so many hybrid forms now. There are people who never even step foot in galleries. And but you know, if you go to, I don't know, we were in had a big retrospective in Madrid, and we had this really awesome tour, like in the middle of the night at the Prado, the big historical museum there, with the first out lesbian ever member of their parliament or whatever they call it. She was incredible. And then this woman who had been a curator at the museum for a long time. And as you walk around, I mean, it's not like I didn't know this before, but as you walk around, you realize this museum is the collection of the kings of Spain. That's what it is. And it has some great stuff that means something to me, but a lot of it is just like royal family pictures with nice clothes on and stuff like that. And in some ways, that's what our museums, I mean, are now. It's you know, I'm emphasizing it, which may be a little bit unfair, but it's also a little bit fair. You know, if you go in a museum and look at what's on the wall and try to figure out why it's there, who gave it to them, etc., we are not controlling this. You know, 100 years from now, I want to see the true picture of our incredible culture. Obviously, museums can't collect everything, but if they keep doing what they're doing, it's not the history of art, it's the history of wealth and power.
And that's obviously something that as you say, and that's obviously something that really has to be attacked also from within the institutional level. And you know, that really has to be an agenda item that sort of like is taken seriously from the top down. I know a lot of curators who are really trying hard from the inside to sort of change the sort of general tendency, which you so aptly described and which is absolutely true across the board. But often that is not enough. I mean, as you say, like what we have to do is we have to educate people. We have to really get them to understand there are more perspectives out there that we would like to see and that we would like to bring into the museum, and that we need their help in doing that too. And that it's not enough to, you know, to sort of regurgitate exhibitions by artists that are already well represented, well known, and but it's a long road, and it has a lot to do with you know, trying to educate people, as Claudia said, like trying to bring them into the fold, trying to show them alternative voices and get them excited about it, and put their money where their mouth is at the end of the day. But it's not going to change overnight, unfortunately, as long as the funding structure is what it is. But I agree with you, we have to work on it consistently and exclusively as something that, if we want our institutions to be more inclusive, more reflective of the society that we want to live in, then we still have a long way to go.
And just to say, there's no lack of great artists out there.
No.
So I'm not attacking the top whatever at all. And but there's no lack of incredible artists.
There certainly isn't. I just want to ask you something, because and Claudia, you sort of like touched upon this briefly in your remarks. Since this symposium or this panel was convened under the umbrella of the Arts of the West, and even Arnold in his introductory keynote touched upon the you know, the West, or the role of the West, the pioneering role of the West, of maybe introducing different models of existence. Do you feel that people who share here, who live here, who've chosen to live here in the arts, whether they're artists, curators, academics, do you feel there's a shared sensibility about a different opportunity here in the West, or that has sort of influenced the decision-making process about staying here and working here? I mean, Claudia, maybe I can throw this to you, since you came back, so to speak. I mean, like, what, you know, I'm curious to see what your motivation is also.
Sorry, what's the question exactly?
No, I mean, just this, since we're here in San Francisco, and since we're, the idea of I mean, since we are here in the West, I mean, obviously, there's a reason that you came here, I mean, after living in New York for so long, and open your own business here, which is a huge commitment. And so, you know, do you feel that there's something about this environment, this region, that has a transformative potential that you cannot sense otherwise, that is rooted in a history and legacy of, you know, counterculture and something like that?
Yeah, and my comparison is, because that's where I came from, although I realize Los Angeles is in the West and has a different art scene and could be used, it's like a totally different thing too. But one thing that I find, you know, I talked a little bit about the market in my remarks, and one thing about being in San Francisco is that obviously the auction houses have offices here, but we're like a step removed from the market in the same way that New York is. And New York also just has so many galleries, and so it's so huge. There's just so many participants that it felt to me like when I was there that people talk about art and money like in the same breath very regularly. That it's pretty much like everyone follows the auction results, and they all know, like, they're always talking about how much everything is worth all the time. When I came here, I feel like people are really intellectually curious, and San Francisco has this kind of like gold rush, like DIY kind of mentality, where it's a little bit more open and free, and there's a lot of creative freedom, and everyone's sort of like inventing things and wants to be disruptive of whatever systems are there. And so I don't know, like, if the community here is actually big enough to make, you know, a global difference, but I feel like within San Francisco, like, we can kind of do whatever we want. Like, probably no one even knows what we're doing, but at least we know that we're doing something that isn't like 100% influenced by money or influenced by auction results or something like that, which I feel like in New York or places where the market is like way more present and way more pressure, it would be impossible to do.
I feel like I moved to San Francisco from New York when I was 21, and I've never left. And it's because I fell in love with the progressive, bohemian, political, experimental nature of most of the people that I encountered here and the inclusivity. I remember moving here and being shocked that people were offended if you didn't smile at them and say hello when you walk past them on the street. This was 1970. And how different that was growing up in New York. And I think all that is part of why the Bay Area art scene has been so rich. I am an admitted chauvinist, so rich and so generative and communal and supportive because it's been neglected and under-supported and a backwater. And I'm very nervous, worried, traumatized by the gold rush to make San Francisco a world-class city. And I feel those values of bohemianism and political commitment and inclusivity are being driven out by the desire to change this town. And it's probably too late to even talk about it, but the other thing I wanted to say is that museums have to change. Yeah. And the most transformative experience I had was starting a museum, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, 1993. It's so much easier to put in place a progressive agenda when you're starting from zero. You know, from day one, we had a completely integrated staff and board and program because that was our agenda from the city. And so that was something I learned, and that new institutions are needed to inculcate the values of new generations. And museums, I think non-collecting museums are more important than ever because they're, again, generative institutions that are less indebted to moneyed interests and can, like university galleries, be accessible to the entire spectrum of American diversity.
I'm getting the 5-minute warning. I was wondering, Keita, did you have a last word? You were looking at me.
No, I wasn't. I don't.
Oh, okay.
Last
I was
word
like,
is hard.
I was like,
Just, give them hell. Don't take it. We can't change everything, but we can try our best not to let the system beat us down. And the art system, really does that to a lot of people, unfortunately.
I think that was my warning. Mark, would you like to come up? Yeah? Well, thank you all so much for being here. I've been feeling the attention and
We look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you. And one more round of applause for our panelists today. One of the goals here today is to come for the program and stay for the art. So please go visit our galleries here in the building. And I believe they're serving wine in one of them in the back on this floor. So enjoy the rest of your afternoon.